So if at any point, like I'm not moderating the comments, but if you have a question, if you can't understand what I'm saying, either just raise your hand or just put it in the chat, and you who's moderating the chat will be able to answer, or he can interrupt me in between if needed. Uh, I have prepared quite a few slides to go through all of this. The reason why we are saying, why I want to talk about this or why I talk about this, like in an ideal world, you would have restricted this to, say, a DevOps interview or a data engineer interview or a full stack developer interview. But the thing to note about interviews is that no matter what interview you go to, the hiring manager, the recruiter, or the company you're applying for, they want to know whether or not you're a good fit. So the main thing that they want to see in the interview process is whether or not you are a good match. It's a lot like dating. Like you go and meet somebody, you try to have a discussion, you try to impress them, and then you're hoping that they'll want to meet you again. That's exactly what the interview is about. So it doesn't matter whether you're dating somebody in China, whether somebody's in Australia or in India. The rules of dating don't change. Like the core rules stay the same, and the same applies for an interview as well. Which is why I've kept it generic and broad enough that with the kind of tips and tricks I'll walk through, with the kind of things I'll share today, you will be able to clear any interview that you have. There will be some minute details that might change. You may have a different tech stack that you work with. Somebody might be a college fresher, somebody might be with 10 years of experience, but the core skills that you need, the core way to prepare for an interview doesn't change, which is why the topic is to ace any interview. Before I proceed with anything, like one of the things that a lot of candidates don't understand or don't realize is that one, recruiters are very busy. So if you get shortlisted for an interview, you have to make sure you put your best foot forward, because there are probably 100, 200 people who have applied for a job, in some cases even more than that. And a recruiter has they've thoughtfully gone through all the applicants who came in, and they've narrowed down maybe 3 or 5 people, and you're one of those 3 or 5. So if somebody shortlists you for an interview, if they try to reach out to you via email, via video call, or whichever way they reach out, you have to realize that they think you are already a good choice. You're already in the top 3 or 5 people who can do the job. And the whole reason they want to do the interview is to make sure that their understanding of what you do or their understanding of you as a person is true. And there's no red flag. There's nothing that they've missed out or nothing that is missing in your resume that they could see here. But if somebody calls you in for an interview, 9 out of 10 times they want to hire you. They don't want to go back looking for a candidate again. They don't want to be on the search again. So when you are called in for an interview, you go in prepared. Don't go casually for an interview. A lot of candidates come in because they find it too easy, that they applied for a job, the next day they got a call, but they miss out on a lot of opportunities by doing that. The other thing to remember is that when you go in for an interview, like it may be a DevOps interview, it may be like a full stack developer interview or data analyst interview. In all interviews, your likability, and when I say likability, it's basically to say that would the hiring manager or the person interviewing you, will they want to work with you? That assessment, the way they want to see whether they will want to work with you or not, that is what I mean by likability here. That is way more important than your actual skills. I've sat in a lot of interviews where a candidate answered everything and did not get shortlisted. But I've seen other interviews where they probably struggled to answer 20, 30% of the questions. They were good 70% of the time. But because of how they were answering, because how they were presenting the answers, they were engaging in more of a dialogue as opposed to just giving an answer and then not saying anything. That made sure that they got shortlisted and they went to the next round. So like your likability or how you present yourself or what you talk, because people who interview you, they want to make sure that they like working with you. They will want you to be a part of the team. They want you to be a part of the team. That's the core thing that they're trying to go for. And in most cases, if you're going through an interview and it's becoming like a dialogue, you speak something, the recruiter or the interviewer or the hiring manager is coming back and forth with questions. That's what normally is a good interview. If it's just a Q&A where they ask a question, you reply, and then they move on to the next one. If your interview is going that way, it's very unlikely that they will pass you or that you will clear and go to the next round. Now, as far as my introduction is concerned, you introduced me briefly at the start that I currently work for Atlassian as a product lead, and I'm also a coach at jracademy. I'm a DevOps and a career coach. But as far as my background goes, I've been working in the industry for about 16 years, and mostly in startups in India, in UK, in Australia, and I've also worked for a brief period in the US. And a lot of people, when they work for these companies or for any company for that matter, they don't like to do interviews. So if they get called in to do interviews, they try to avoid them as much as possible. I am on the other side of it. So I try to look for opportunities where I can go and sit in interviews. I can be on interview panels, either for my team or another team. So as a result of that, I've conducted close to 500 to 600 interviews, and I've easily scanned maybe 2,000 or even 3,000 resumes in the past 8 to 10 years. So I do a lot of interviews at Atlassian. I've done that at my previous role. So I have a good understanding of what a recruiter looks for in a resume, what they look for in an interview, and how they shortlist people. So I have a lot of background and understanding in that. Now, before we go ahead with the webinar, before I talk about anything else, I just want to do a quick trivia or a quick question here. So how much time do you guys think, and you can answer in the chat, how much time do you guys think a recruiter spends looking at your resume? Is it 1 minute? Is it maybe 30 seconds or 8 to 10 seconds? I think quickly wait. Yeah. A lot of you are saying C. Some of you are also replying as B. Nobody's seeing A, which is very good. So at least we are very close to reality, but okay, I'll wait for a few more seconds. Yeah. Looks like yes. So, okay. I'll breathe is there as well. I'll wait a bit. So when you apply for a job and your resume goes through and like an application tracking software where a software scans it and reviews it, and then a recruiter starts looking at it. At that stage, when they look at your resume for the very first time, they will only probably spend 8 to 10 seconds. They won't even spend half a minute at your resume. So it'll be a very, very brief window where they spend 8 to 10 seconds. They try to make some notes. They try to decide whether or not you meet the criteria, whether or not you meet the checklist, and they will move on. So if your resume is not tailored to the role, if it's not ready, if it has typos, if there are mistakes in there, you will not even make that first cut. So the first time they look at it, they will probably spend 8 to 10 seconds. Once they've narrowed down your resume amongst like from 100, maybe they've narrowed down 10 or 15 people, then they probably spend 30 to 45 seconds doing that further. And then eventually they will sit down and read it. So it goes in the order C, B, and A. But the first time to make that first cut, you only get 8 to 10 seconds. Cool. And one more question for you guys. How many, like what percentage of candidates do you think get headhunted when they're applying for a role? 10%. Yeah. That's pretty good. Getting all A's here, which is quite nice. Cool. Yes. Okay. Yeah. So, like most of us, sorry, depends on the skill set. Yes, that's correct, Natalia. Chris Wang, 1%. Yes, I think Chris, you're more on the extreme end, but from what I've seen with recruiters, normally like 8 to 10% candidates who apply for a role, like who get hired eventually, were headhunted. So recruiters found those candidates, and about another 10 to 15% or about 20% are the ones that come through referrals, and rest is all 80%. So unless you are in that top 10 to 30% where either you were headhunted by a recruiter or you were referred by someone, you will be competing against a very big pool of candidates. So you will be competing against 70% people who are applying for the role. And the reason why I'm talking about all this is about how long a recruiter spends on your resume, about how many people get headhunted, is because as candidates, we need to understand that getting shortlisted is sometimes more challenging than actually clearing the interview. And the reason for that is that, like, when you look at the hiring funnel, for most jobs, there are at least 100 to 200 applicants. And with the kind of scenario, like with the kind of situation that we are in today, with a lot of layoffs happening everywhere, there's a lot of budget cuts, this number has probably gone up to about 300. So for every single role that is out there, there are at least 200 to 300 candidates that come up, that apply for a role. And from that 200 or 300, a recruiter is only going to select maybe the first 5 or 7 that they think are a good fit. And they won't, like if they find the first 5 or 7 in the first 100 people, they won't even look at the rest 200. So just because you applied for a role and you are capable, you have all the skills, it is still possible that even with all that, you may not get shortlisted because the recruiter found there 5 or 7 people from the first 100 itself. So the reason why this is important to note is if you're actively looking for a job, figure out a way to set up an alert on LinkedIn or on Seek or whatever website you use, and spend 10 to 15 minutes or 30 minutes every morning looking at the jobs that have been posted, and make sure you're in the first like 50 to 100 candidates who apply. It's not to say that if you apply later, you won't get shortlisted, but you sort of reduce your chances if you do that. So the key takeaway is like the first, be in the top 100 or 50 to 100 people who apply. From that list of all the candidates who come in, a recruiter will ideally fill out 5 to 7 that they think are suitable and take them to the hiring manager. The hiring manager will then filter out half of those. So from the 5 or 7 that are presented, 2 or 3 get interviewed. And out of the 2 or 3 that get interviewed, one of them will eventually get the offer. And you want to be that one who gets the offer. So the easiest way to guarantee that you will at least get into that funnel, you will be presented to the hiring manager, is to, one, have a good resume, have a good cover letter, and be in the first pool of applicants to apply for the role. Cool. Now, this is my experience from when I moved to Australia about 10 years ago. So when I came here, I had taken a career break before moving to Australia. So for 2 years, I had gone traveling and I was not working. And when I came here, I had to struggle a lot to find my first proper job, like a proper IT job, similar to what I used to do before my career break. So in about 6 months, I applied for 380 jobs. And these were not any random jobs that I was applying for. I would meticulously spend 2 to 3 hours every day looking at all the jobs that I was eligible for, suitable for, tailor my resumes, and then maybe apply 3 to 5 that I was really, really relevant for my role. So all of these 380, I was actually suitable, I was actually relevant. And in that, I only got 2 interviews at the end of it, by the end of 6 months. And I applied for both roles, did about 4 to 5 rounds in each of them. And I got one offer, the other one I got rejected. But in the last round, when I got rejected, before they even told me, I knew that I was going to get rejected based on how my interview went. So it was similar to what I was saying earlier. It was more like a question and answer. I was not able to engage the interviewer a lot. One of the reasons was that I was not very well prepared. It was a very last minute interview. I could have said no for it. But end of the day, I knew I was not going to get that offer. The other one went quite well, for which I got the offer and I got hired. Cool. Quickly check. There's nothing in the chat. Perfect. Cool. Now, is there a question in the top 10%? Chris, I have noted your question. I'll get to that towards the end of this. Perfect. Cool. Another trivia for you guys. And I know I was talking about this earlier, like what is the average number, but what do you think is the current state? Like how many applicants are applying for a role today when a job posted? And this, I should probably frame this question like on the first day. So not in all, but not in the whole spectrum, but on the day that it gets posted. How many applicants do you think a job gets? Seeing a lot of Bs, I'm seeing a lot of Cs as well, which is good. So if you look at some of the reports from earlier in the year, most jobs on the first day would get anywhere between 120 to 150 applicants. But with the kind of market that is right now, it has become very common that we are getting close to, I jumped ahead. Yeah. So we're getting close to 200, 250 plus applicants even on the first day directly. And LinkedIn is notoriously bad for these numbers. They have made this very complicated because of how they present the option. So the moment a job is posted on LinkedIn, by the end of the day, you will easily see 400 to 500 applicants. At least 70 to 80% of those come from LinkedIn Easy Apply, where that option is available. And it's the worst thing you can do for your job search because you can just mindlessly keep applying for jobs. You don't even have to read through the description. You don't have to tailor your resume. So a lot of people who apply through LinkedIn Easy Apply actually don't end up getting shortlisted because they're not really paying that much attention. The other thing, the numbers on LinkedIn sort of confuse you, is that not all jobs are actually posted on LinkedIn. When you have to apply for the job, you have to go to an external party or you have to go to an external website to apply for the job. So the number of applicants that you see on LinkedIn are actually the number of people who have clicked the button. They may or may not have actually completed the job by then. So the numbers that you see on LinkedIn, don't rely on them 100%. But if you're seeing at least 4 to 500, you can assume one third, so at least 30% of that, or at least half, have actually ended up applying for the role. So if you see 4 to 500 number, you can easily, safely assume that about 200 people have easily applied for that job. Now, when you're applying for a job, and I was talking about job applications so far, is because getting shortlisted is really, really tough. Interviews are comparatively easier. Now, some of the ways where how a lot of people get shortlisted, how they stand out from all the other people who have applied, is like some of these are quite obvious, that you have a good resume, it is tailored to the job, it has all the right keywords, it's not too long to read, it has all the necessary information, it talks about the projects that you've delivered, it talks. So a good resume with a good cover letter is a basic, like you at least need that. Referrals are very good, because the moment somebody refers you, a recruiter builds, there's like a chain of trust that is built for the recruiter. So they don't have to go and validate you, they don't have to go and verify. In pretty much 100% of the case, if somebody refers you, a recruiter will definitely pick up the phone and talk to you, or set up a meeting to understand more about your suitability, and they will give you a fair chance. So when you're applying for jobs, once your resume and cover letter is ready, make sure if you can find somebody who can refer you, that will greatly increase your chances of getting shortlisted, of at least getting that first interview call. Another thing that I've seen work very well in the recent past on LinkedIn is that once you apply for a job, sign up for LinkedIn Premium, and there are also other ways on how to find the email address of the recruiter. Like you can go to a common group on LinkedIn and find it from there. So there are different ways to find their contact details to add them. But if you send them a personalized message after applying for the role, either an open-ended question or something that talks about how you are suitable, or trying to give them more information, it does work in a lot of cases. But your message has to be well crafted. But there are lots of templates on the internet which tell you how to do that, and the strategy has worked very well for a lot of people. One of the most underrated ones is being active on LinkedIn. But a lot of people think that just leaving comments on a lot of posts for the kind of roles they are looking for is activity. But you have to do that, but it has to be more targeted. So say hypothetically, if you wanted to apply for roles in Atlassian, the way you would approach that is you would try and find some of the roles that you want to apply for. So say a DevOps engineer, or a data analyst, or a data scientist. You would then try and find people who work in those roles in Atlassian and see where they are active, what kind of groups they are active, what kinds of posts they're commenting on. If they are putting out any posts, you try to engage with them, build a rapport. And then once your approach is targeted, once you've narrowed down the companies, you narrow down the people you want to engage with, then start engaging with them, try to reach out to them, set up a coffee chat. That seems to get a lot of people across the door, much more than any of the above. Because you've already shown the engagement, you've shown how you add value. The last one that I've started seeing is still not very popular. I've seen very few people do this, but one good way to stand out from the crowd is people have started making quick 1-minute videos which talk through their experience, which talk through their resume, and they include a link to that in their resume, in their cover letter, on the LinkedIn profile, or in the message that they send to the recruiter. The main goal for all of this is that out of the pool of candidates, the recruiter should remember that you were somebody who did something different, and you are very keen to do the job. You're very keen to do the role. That's the message you're trying to drive home with them. Now, no matter what industry you come in, no matter what kind of role you're applying for, most interviews look like this. So you have a recruiter, or if it's a fairly big company, you would have somebody which is a sourcer who works in the same area as a recruiter, where they try to find candidates, they try to search them on LinkedIn, and recruiter is the one who actually engages and discusses with them. So there are two people who sort of do that role. There will be an interview where they test for your skills, they test for your technical assessment. Once you do that, once you pass that, you normally do an interview with a hiring manager, who is the person that you will end up reporting to. Once the hiring manager is happy, you end up doing a team fit. And all of this that I'm showing here, this is more targeted towards how product companies do product companies like Atlassian, Facebook, Canva, Google. They do all of these interview rounds. Other companies also do this, but they may not do as many rounds. So in a product company, 5 to 6 rounds have become very common. Some companies like Amazon have additional rounds, so they maybe do 7 or 8 rounds for some of the roles, or a vast majority of their roles. But 4 to 5 rounds is very common if you're in a product space. If you go to a service-based company, or a bank, or a financial services one, maybe 2 to 3 rounds are very common. So some of these would be combined. If you apply for a role in a government sector, and I'm talking about all of this from the perspective of jobs in Australia. If you apply all of this in the government sector, maybe the recruiter will do an initial screen and talk to you, and everything else will be packaged into one interview. So a team fit, hiring manager, tech skills, culture fit. They will have 4 or 5 panelists, but everything will be bundled into one single interview. And then based on that, they will send you an offer. So time-wise, government jobs are the best when you're applying, but getting shortlisted is much harder because of the number of applicants they get and because of how tedious their process is. Product companies are good. They're somewhere in the middle, but they have too many interview rounds, and a lot of candidates get very discouraged because of the number of rounds they have to sit through. I'll quickly check. Okay, there are no questions. Perfect. Now, when you go in for an interview, a recruiter or a hiring manager or anybody who is interviewing you, they know what the role is about. So if it's for a DevOps engineer, they know what a DevOps engineer does. They have written the job description. They have listed out every single thing that you see on the ad. So if you only talk about same things in your interview, they get very, very bored. I've had this experience. I have gotten very bored in a lot of interviews. I've seen other panelists with me who have been completely disengaged because of how people talk or how they talk about their experience. So an interviewer is not really there to know what the role is about. They don't want to hear from you what a DevOps engineer does. They want to understand what are the projects you have done. They want to understand what were some of the highs and lows from the projects you delivered. They want to know what was your participation. They want to know your story. They don't want to know what a DevOps engineer does, because they very well know what the DevOps engineer does day to day because they are interviewing for that role. One of the other mistakes that a lot of candidates do is that they just keep narrating everything that they do without really trying to show emphasis on one thing or another. And you don't have to talk about a lot of things. You have to talk about things where you want the discussion to go. So you have to talk about the projects where you want to talk about, which can showcase you as the hero of the problem, or when you want to talk about a mistake. So the key takeaway from this slide or whatever we've spoken so far is that you have to tell stories. You have to engage your audience. You have to engage the interviewer. Otherwise, they will become disengaged. And the more disengaged they are through the interview, the less likely they are to pass you in the interview and move you on to the next round. And now that we know that you need to engage with the interviewer, you need to engage with people who are on the panel, who are asking questions, how do you go about doing that? So one of the easiest ways to ask a lot of questions in the interview, to ask a lot of questions to show that you know the company, you know the people, you understand what they do. And if you were doing an interview maybe 10 or 15 years ago, the landscape was very different. It was hard to find what the company did. There were no videos on the internet. They didn't talk about the charities they support. They didn't talk about the values they had. So things were very difficult to find. Today, no matter what company you apply for, if you spend 20 to 30 minutes online, on YouTube, on their website, look at the videos, look at the blogs they put out, look at the kind of values they have, look at some of the customer stories, some of the employee journeys. So spend 30 to 45 minutes and you will know everything that the company is about besides the products that they build, besides the work that they do. And that will give you enough talking points in the interview. The other benefit that you get from doing all of this research about the company is that when you go and talk in an interview, when you show that you know what the company values are, what kind of things they talk about, what volunteering opportunities they have, the interviewer, the panelists, they think like you are already part of the team. They feel like you know what they do, you know what their day looks like, you know what their rituals are like. So they're more inclined to like you in the interview. They're more inclined to see that you fit in. And that's what you're trying to do along with everything else in the interview. And just quickly do a time check. Okay, we're good for time. Cool. Now, most of your interview questions fall in these 3-4 buckets. So either you have a technical interview, depending on what role you're going, and the definition of technical can change. If you're a data analyst, then it could be something around SQL. It could be around dashboards that you build. If you're an SRE or a DevOps engineer, it could be a programming exercise. It could be a Unix interview. So technical is very specific to your skill. That's what I mean by technical here. Behavioral is where they ask you interpersonal questions, where they talk about what kind of problems you've solved for, what kind of skills you have, like soft skills you have, what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, what were the projects that completely failed that you were leading, when you had to give feedback to people. So those are all your behavioral questions. The exercise walkthrough is when you've been given a home exercise and you're presenting that in an interview round, and people are cross questioning, they are asking you questions, they are trying to find holes in what you're saying, they're trying to see if you follow along, they're trying to question you, they're trying to understand your approach. So that's what happens in the exercise walkthrough. And then the last one, which is not a separate interview of its own, but something that you cover in all the interviews, is where the panelists want to know what you are about. They want to know your story, they want to know your experience, just to see if you can fit in and just to see whether they would like to work with you. That's the main thing they want to do. Now, a quick question again. Would any of you be able to tell me what are the 3 most common interview questions that you get asked, no matter what job you apply for? You can type them, you can unmute and answer those. I see something in the chat. Introduce yourself. Yeah, that's the first one. Yep. Tell me about yourself. Yeah, same version of the first one. So that's probably the most common. Okay, visa status, no. Why do you choose our company? No. Talk about the last project. No. Difficult tasks you tackle. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Close one, but not in the top 3. You may or may not get a lot of these. So I think from all the answers we have so far, I think tell me about yourself or a project that you worked on, like, is the most common one. But there are 2 more that we are missing so far. How do you deal conflict? How do you deal conflict? I will probably give that one. That's similar to like stakeholder or a difficult situation. So that one is fine. But there's one more that is very common that nobody has shared so far. Why do you choose our company? What's your visa status? So we're getting a good variety of options. Where do you see yourself? Strengths and weaknesses. Yes, Cindy. That was the one I was looking for. Perfect. Cool. So a bit about yourself. What are your strengths and weaknesses? And then how do you handle difficult stakeholders? So no matter what company you apply for, whether you do an interview in India, you do it in Australia, you do it in China, or any other part of the world, these 3 questions, either directly or in some form, will always be asked, no matter whether it's a government job or a private job or a product company. And the questions are very boring. They're very stock standard. They have been there for a while. But how you answer and where you navigate the discussion, where you take the discussion with all of this is like the make or break for you. So I'll give you some examples of how I answer this or what makes a good answer for this. So when somebody says, tell me a bit about yourself, pretty much 90% of candidates talk about their whole work experience in chronological order. So they will start with their first job, then the second, then the third, then the fourth. But a recruiter or an interviewer, a recruiter maybe, yes, they may be a little bit interested, but most panelists are not interested in knowing the history of where you started and where you are today. They're more interested in your recent job or what kind of skills you bring to the table, or whether you're a problem solver, whether you deal with, so like they want to know something specific about you. When they say talk a bit about yourself, they don't want a list of everything that you've done in your career so far. They don't want to know whether you worked at 5 companies or 3. That's probably the worst way to answer that question. And the moment you start doing that, their mind is completely thinking about something else. Then nobody's paying attention when you just give that list. So when you're asked about, tell me a bit about yourself, talk about your most recent role and not the 20 things that you've done in the past role. So say if I was talking about this, if I was giving an interview, I would start with saying that I'm a product leader at Atlassian and I'm handling some of the largest clients that Atlassian has ever had. If I have some names like, if you're in Australia, so something like Commonwealth Bank or Woolworth, which is a store, or maybe PayPal or Tesla. So these are some of the customers that I work with on a day-to-day basis. And these are the kind of problems that I solve for them. So I help them migrate their data to our SaaS environments. So, and that's what I really like about the job that I do. And I have a big history of DevOps engineers, but I won't go into, like, I have a big career of DevOps and release management, but I won't go into a lot of specifics or details about those. But I'm happy to elaborate more on my current role. Or if you have questions about my past, I can delve into those. But I would want to focus on my current. So the whole reason about doing that is I focus on the current role, which is where I want the discussion to go. I throw in some keywords, I throw in some customer names so that the interviewer, the panelists know what kind of work I do, what kind of escalations I handle, what size customers I work with. So the idea is that I'm trying to indirectly show them a lot of things without really saying that I handle CEO escalation. So rather than saying I work with customers who have enterprise contracts who pay my company millions of dollars, I'm trying to throw in big names and trying to talk about the work that I do so that they get an idea of what kind of seniority I have rather than saying it out very clearly. When I would talk about, say, strengths or weaknesses, one of the most boring answers people give for their strengths, people have a lot of good answers, but when they come about weaknesses, they talk about very bad things. Like some of the most common answers is people say that they work too much, they try to overcome it, they try to over deliver. If you can't back it up with a story, if you can't back it up with a good narrative of why that is a weakness, and more than saying that it's a weakness, an interviewer wants to know what you're going to do about it, how you're going to solve it. So one of the ways I've started, I used to answer this. I haven't done an interview directly in the past few years because I've been at Atlassian for a good 7 years now. But one of the best answers I've heard around this is, I asked this to a candidate, and they came back saying that one of my weaknesses, I can't give fake commitments. So like I can't give a fake deadline. So whenever I'm assigned a new project, I take a week, I try to assess the project, and then I give an actual timeline of how long something takes. And the reason why he said this is a weakness is people want to hear that everything will be done on time, everything will be done in a very short time frame within budget, nothing will blow up. But that's not the thing he wants to do. So he wants to make sure that the expectations are realistic. It causes a bit of friction when the project starts, but over time people realize the value of it. And I asked him why he chose this or how he's trying to overcome this. So he said it's not so much about overcoming, but if you start new in a company and this is how you start engaging, you lose a lot of trust because people think that you don't understand things or you don't want to do work in time. But once you have built trust, once you have built rapport, this is the best way to handle this situation. So that was his answer, and it resonated very well with me and same with all the other panelists who were out there. But if he had just said that he works too hard or he tries to deliver too much, those are very stock standard and they don't make a lot of sense. Like you can't really back it up with a story, you can't really make it relatable. The third one that we hear a lot is how you deal with difficult stakeholders or how you give feedback to somebody who was not performing well in your team. One of the best ways to answer this is go prepared with the story, tell them how you did something. And if you're very young in your career, like if you've had maybe 2-3 years of experience, you can say that you've never had to do this. It's okay to say that you haven't had to do something rather than come up with a fake story which you can't back up with. So that's one of the mistakes that a lot of people do is they try to fabricate a story when they don't have a personal experience. Or if you don't have a personal experience at work, talk about something from your life. You could have a sibling, or you could have a childhood story where you had to manage something, or when you were a kid, you had to get a toy and your parents were completely against it, and you could talk about how you navigated that. Not that how a child navigates with their parents can be used at work, but it leaves a good impression. It leaves a good story with the recruiter, with the interviewer. So they remember you from all the other people that they interviewed on the day, and they want to give you a chance. So it leaves. So you're trying to leave those notes in their head so that they remember you when they're doing the end of the day they're doing the analysis to see who is a good fit for the role. Because not everybody will have an experience where they poach people, where they've had to lay off somebody, where they've had to fire someone, or tell people that they're not good at work. So pick your story, go prepared for the interview. But a lot of these questions will be there no matter what interview you go in. Cool. Now, when you prepare for an interview, doing research is the most underrated thing that I've seen. I've seen a lot of candidates show up for interviews completely unprepared. And most interviews, like at least 80 to 90% of questions that you see in an interview, you can find them on Google and you can find answers. So what I normally do when I prepare for an interview, when I coach people for an interview, is the first 30 to 45 minutes, you research all the questions. And this is more relevant for behavioral questions. Technical ones are slightly different, but this is purely from the perspective of a behavioral question. So spend like 25 to 30 minutes on Google, find all the questions that search on Glassdoor, search on different forums, just do quick research for what kind of questions that are asked. Spend 25 to 30 minutes, list out all the questions, spend the next 45 to 60 minutes writing down answers or finding answers on the internet, and then do a rehearsal, because when you go in, you're not going to have your notes in front of you. You're going to have to speak about these. You're going to have stories to back this up. So spend some time or go on some forums, go on Reddit, go on Quora, ask people, talk to your friends, but come prepared for the interview. But within 2 to 3 hours, you can prepare for any interview. It doesn't matter what the role is, what the job is. and you can clear most of them if you come prepared for it. That's the main takeaway from this. And it's very easy to prepare today. There's a lot of information online. There are a lot of people who are ready there, who want to help you out, who will help you out for free, as long as you go with the preparation and they know that you're there with earnest. And yeah, this is something that I was alluding to in the earlier slide, that more than 90, and I said 90 and 10 here, but in reality, it's more like 95 or even 99 and 1%, that very rarely you will get a question that you can't find on the internet. And if you come prepared, you can ace any behavioral question. Like, they're all there, they're very common. They may be asked in a slightly different manner, but you can present the same story or the same preparation that you did for pretty much all of them. And just for, I don't know if there are any people here who are good with stats or who are good with data numbers. Just for the sake of coherence, I put 10% as other, like to have, I think it's called statistical validity or something, or statistical significance. I just broke it down as 90-10. But you can pretty much answer all questions without by finding the answers on the internet. Cool. Now, when you go for an interview, it's more like doing like a stage performance. It's like presenting in front of people, because you have to prepare, two, you have to present things, and then people are there to judge you. They're there to say whether you are good or bad, whether they want to give you another chance. So preparation is the main thing that you need in an interview, and your body language, anything else that you do in an interview, you're very nervous when you're presenting on stage. The same happens in the interview. When you're presenting, even though you know the audience, even though you know who they are, whether they're an engineering manager or they're somebody who work at a company, but you don't know how they will respond to your answers. You don't know whether your stories will be engaging to them. And you know very well that they're judging you. They're going to decide whether you make it for the interview or not. So your preparation is very key. And the mindset is also needed, that people are there to judge you, but they also want to like you and hire you. So it's not just judging you to discard you or to reject you. They actually want to hire you more than you want to get hired, because they want to move on to their day-to-day work. They don't want to keep doing interviews forever. So the ball is in your court, it's in your favor, but only if you go well prepared. That's the main thing you need to remember. And then a lot of candidates who come in for interviews, they don't realize that an interview can only ask the questions, but you have complete choice on how you answer them. You can take the discussion in any direction. You can talk about a story. You can talk about a failure. You can talk about a personal anecdote. But in whatever you do, try to, like, if you're talking about work-related answers, always keep it very measurable and tangible. So talk about what was the saving your team got out of it, what was the benefit that was there, what were the mistakes that you get. So say if you built an app and when you launched it, one option could be that the load times in the past used to be 20 seconds. Now you brought it down to 5 seconds. So there was a big gain. But in some cases, you could have a story where it was 20 seconds. You did a lot of work. And on the day of the launch, instead of going down, it went from 20 seconds to 1 minute. And you had to shut down and redeploy the old app. And then you could talk about the learnings. You could talk about the mistakes that you have. So it doesn't always have to be the best things, the good things that happened. You could share examples where you did a mistake, where it was completely the opposite or really, really bad from what you were expecting. And then you can talk about how you're planning to solve it or how you solved it again. Because no matter where you work, there will be mistakes in every single role that you do. Siddharth, I'll get to that on a senior question, but I'll get to that one as I get to the end. Yes. Cool. Now, I'll give you an example. I was talking to a friend recently. He was I was coaching him on how to prepare, and then I kept emphasizing that he has to go and prepare. So when he went in for the interview, about more than halfway through the interview, the hiring manager asked him, completely unrelated to his job, he was applying for a data analyst role. They asked him, what makes you memorable? Or why will I remember you if I met you in personal life? What would I remember about you? And he was completely taken aback. Like, it was not in the list of questions he had prepared for. He did not find this on Google. And in his head, he thought, I can't answer the question, but at least let me try and make a joke about it. So he just told them that, do you mind if I take a few seconds to think about it? Because I'm very well prepared for this question. And the hiring manager just burst out laughing. And they moved out to the next question. So rather than saying he is not prepared, he just thought of a joke. And it could not have landed well. In his case, it landed well. But the key takeaway here, like the main message I'm trying to drive home here, is that even with all the preparation, you can have scenarios, you can have questions that come up where you don't have an answer. which is completely fine. If you can think of something nice and smart to say that, or say that you can't answer the question or you're not comfortable, you don't have a good answer for it. And rather than giving a bad answer, you would rather just skip the question. And that's perfectly fine. You don't have to answer every single question in the interview. That's the key thing that you need to remember here. Perfect. And then body language is something that there are lots of videos on YouTube. So when you go for an interview, you can watch them. There are lots of blogs, there are lots of books about it. The way I think about body language, or the way I think about increasing likability or making sure that you appear, like the only way to appear confident and composed or be likable or be somebody who's looking very calm and composed in an interview is when you go prepared. If you go prepared, in most cases, when the question comes, your brain already knows what to say. You already have a story. You already have an answer. The only place where you get nervous, where your body language becomes a bit shaky, where you start sweating, is where you have not gone in prepared. So the way I think of body language, or the way I coach people, the easiest way to have a good body language in the interview is through preparation. It's not through anything else. You can do breathing exercises, you can jump, you can scream, you can do everything that you see on YouTube. But if you don't go prepared, none of that will work. They can compliment you, they can help you, but your preparation is super important for all of this. Unless you go prepared, none of this is going to happen. But if you go prepared, you come across as somebody who's very confident, it works really well. It works, it holds attention. People want to listen to what you're saying. And you have to remember that a recruiter is very, very busy. Like they have 200 to 300 applicants for a role. They're probably talking to 50 different people on the day. They're not going to remember half of the names. They're not going to remember what they spoke. So if you come across as somebody who's very calm and composed, somebody who's memorable, somebody who knows what they're talking about, you will leave a mark. It's very easy to stand out if you go prepared for the interview. Now, I spoke about this earlier, but if you have an interview which is not a technical interview, it's a behavioral or a situational interview, you have to go prepared. Like preparation is the only way. And in my experience, Glassdoor and Google search are the only two things that I've done. For any interview I go to, I spend 30 minutes and I know everything that I need to know about the interview. And obviously I'm saying 30 minutes because I've done a lot of interviews myself. I've applied for a lot of jobs. But if you're starting out, if you've not done a lot of them, 1 to 2 hours is good enough. But you can clear any behavioral interview in 1 to 2 hours. You don't have to worry about it. You don't need anything more than 2 hours if you go prepared. When I applied for Atlassian, and this was in 2016 now. So the last round in my interview process was a culture fit round. And one thing I forgot to mention earlier, like every time you get an interview, always ask the recruiter for LinkedIn profile of people who are going to interview you, their names, their LinkedIn profile. So what I did in my example is I had the culture fit round at Atlassian. I got the interview details. I got their LinkedIn profile. Now, from their LinkedIn profile, I found their blog. I found their Instagram page. I found their Facebook page. I found every single place where they're active on the internet. I found Reddit forums. I found Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. I found their blog. I found MySpace or some old social media, like social community kind of a thing. And I knew everything about the person before I went in for the interview. I know they had a Harley Davidson. They had done motorbike trips across America 3 times. They liked hiking. I knew what part of India they came from. So my interview, which was supposed to happen for about 45 minutes, ran for about 2 hours. But for at least an hour and a half, in that 2 hours, we were only talking about the road trips that both of us had done, the bikes that we have ridden, how my career break was, the kind of journeys I had, the kind of countries we visited. And that is what the whole interview was about, as opposed to the actual things he wanted to cover. Because I knew so much about the interviewer, I was asking all the questions about him, about his life, about his journey. And this was a culture fit round, so we could talk about different things. But the same rule applies for other interviews as well. So if you go for, say, a DevOps engineer role, and your engineering manager had a startup in the past, you could ask about that when you start talking about questions. You could throw in some keywords. You could talk about what they did or what was their learning. So you have to remember that any research that you do, not just about the questions, but the research is also about the people who are going to interview you, about the panelists that we have. And I touched upon this earlier when we talk about stakeholders, when we talk about stressful situations that you work through. Again, research, come up with examples. If you can't come up with examples from your professional life, come up with something from your personal life, but come up with an example. And if you've tried everything and you can't come up with an example, make sure you're able to convey that very clearly on why you don't have an example. And if you can't think of something, ask a sibling, ask a friend. You may not realize something very obvious that can be used in an interview, but people around you would be able to tell you on how to do that. At the end of every interview, people leave about, say, 3 to 5 minutes to ask questions for what you want to know about them, for what you want to know about the company. What I tell people or what I coach people about this is, do your research about the company, do your research about the kind of policies they have, the kind of values they have, the kind of events they sponsor, or like say for Atlassian, there was a recent scenario where they banned, there was something happening in one part of the world, and they said that in a way to prove their political stance, they will stop selling software to companies from one country. So if there's something bold that a company has done, make sure you make a note of that and bring that up in your discussion. So that would be about the company and their culture. When you research the interviewer, talk about the kind of projects they work on, talk about what are the changes they have seen within the company since they have joined. So make the questions very personal. Don't talk about your future in the company. That's not what they're interested in asking. So when you ask questions, a lot of candidates end up talking about what will happen next, where will they see if they get a job. None of that is relevant when it's you to know more about them, more about the company, more about what you've read about the company, not really about your future in the company. That's the worst place to ask those questions. If there's anything that you need to know about where they fit in, what is going to happen next in the interview, they are going to share all of that anyways. So try to use this time to ask about them, ask about the company. If you see something, if you were applying for, say, a data engineer role and the person interviewing you had written a blog on the company website, talk about that, ask about their experience. If you find something that they posted on LinkedIn that got a lot of engagement, bring that into the discussion. So show them that you understand, that you know what kind of things to do, what kind of work they do, and then bring it up in the discussion. Cool.